Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. This is Teens Create, part of our Fayetteville Public Library summer reading series of Imagine Your Story. And today's video is Introduction to Sewing, and we have a special guest today. Michael Burson is a Instagram, TikTok creative out of Charlotte, North Carolina, my dear friend. And we had his wife, Haley Burson, teach our cosplay class recently. Now we have Michael Burson teaching us Introduction to Sewing, and we are so happy to have him. Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. And we are on YouTube. So
you are on YouTube. Perfect. See, we cover all our bases here. So all the social medias.
All of them. Yep.
But Michael is here to give us a rundown on how to interpret sewing instructions. He's going to talk about how he got into sewing, and hopefully this will inspire some of us to get into the hobby ourselves. I know I have yet to do it. I don't have a machine to do it, but maybe someday. Getting a machine would probably be a good start.
I like it.
You know, we're expanding our library facility soon, and I'm hoping that in our new spaces we'll have technologies like sewing machines, like weird things that are kind of out of the ordinary to have in a library, but are still applicable skills for teens to learn.
Yeah, maker spaces are so important, and it is kind of like, well, I can't get started because I don't have a sewing machine. But yeah, maker spaces, like public maker spaces and library maker spaces, it's really important to have those things for people that it might be a little difficult to get hold of one.
Definitely. So hopefully we'll have a lot of that coming to our new library in the fall, coming soon. So Michael, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how you got into sewing?
Yeah, so Michael, I go on Instagram. I am the Wizard Tailor. That's my username on Instagram, and that's where I do most of my sharing and putting out. So I work with my wife Haley. Together, we just started. We loved Halloween. We loved costumes and wearing it. And with sewing and cosplay and costuming, it's like you get to have Halloween all year round. And meet other fun, creative people who are into making this stuff. We started kind of like cosplay as a hobby in 2015. We were both really, really excited about The Force Awakens coming out.
Oh yeah.
And so we decided to do a Kylo Ren and Rey couples cosplay, not shipping, but just the two of us together. And I had really no idea what I was doing. I was trying to find like the fabric for it. It was too expensive. I was in grad school, so I made the whole thing out of black burlap.
Oh wow.
Which almost immediately disintegrated, but it looked cool like when I wore it. I made the helmet out of like plaster and cardboard. We made Haley's Rey outfit out of like old stuff from Goodwill that we found, and it just really ignited a passion for like, well, what's the next thing we're gonna make, and how can we make that even better? How can it be better constructed so it doesn't fall apart pretty much as soon as you put it on? How can we make it fit better to where it looks better on us, and we're wearing the costume instead of the costume wearing us? So that just created a drive in me to figure out how all this stuff works, so that when I put something on, I can say like, this is something I could wear for 5 more years and not worry about all the seams coming apart and fraying, which can happen a lot at cons, or at, if you go to Comic-Cons or other events, you want your stuff to stay together. So that's why I'm kind of into making complete garments rather than just kind of like stuff that'll disintegrate as soon as you put it on.
For sure. And it's got to be way more satisfying to know that you made this rather than you just went to the store and like got it out of a package, which is something I would do totally. But
and that's totally valid. You can cosplay anywhere you want.
Definitely. We talked about that. Like there's no wrong way to cosplay. Well, there are wrong ways to cosplay, but that's not one of them.
And you can buy a pre-made a costume from somebody, and you can adapt it. And maybe it doesn't fit you right in the shoulders, or maybe you like it to be tighter or looser, and you can adapt it. So learning those sewing skills is a way to create your own stuff and adapt stuff to make it really your own.
Sure. And probably, this is an assumption, like cosplay, there's probably lots of ways that you can start to learn how to do it. And I assume that would be the same for sewing.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many different avenues that you can go down. I didn't really have a lot of instruction. I learned mostly from trial and error, lots and lots and lots of error, and figuring it out.
And we learn from that.
You do. Errors, they're important. They're teaching lessons. So learning from that, learning from YouTube videos, that's really how I learned a lot. I also took a sewing class at community college. So it's just like community colleges don't just offer like English, math, and science gen ed courses. They also offer like personal enrichment courses. So I took one of those at my community college and learned all kinds of stuff I'd never known before. And it was really, really helpful. And so if you can find an opportunity to do that, they're usually not too expensive. And just having somebody in front of you that really knows what they're doing can be so helpful, because they'll give you those little tips and tricks that'll save frustration. Because I think a lot of people are either intimidated by sewing, or they try and they give up because it's like, oh, well, this didn't work. Like I can't figure out how to put the stupid thread in the machine and everything. And like, yeah, you're probably going to mess it up like 5 times. And then on the 6th time, you're going to get it right. And then you'll get going. So trial and error is a big part of this. So like being patient with yourself and being kind to yourself is really important.
Definitely. And it's really cool to know that there are places in the community that teach this sort of thing, and we might be able to find some resources. If anyone's watching this video later and wants to know if there are places in Fayetteville that do it, we can find that out for you, because we're librarians and we can do that. So Michael, you probably have all these supplies ready to go. So if I were someone that is just starting out in sewing, I could probably go to the local Walmart or someplace and find everything that I would need: a sewing machine, thread, and whatever else you're going to talk about.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, Walmart is one place.
Not saying that's the best place, but we're in Arkansas, so we have to plug our Walmarts.
Walmart's, they kind of reintroduced their sewing section in recent years. I kind of noticed that the fabric and craft aisle kind of went away, and now it's come back. So here in Charlotte, at least 2 of the Walmarts I visit do have fabric sections. So you can get just basic cotton fabric there. Some others you can get threads and buttons, zippers. You can usually buy sewing machines. I've got all of mine off Amazon. The ones that I use are all from Amazon. You can get refurbished sewing machines off Amazon. Refurbished just means that somebody's gone over it, used one, and make sure that everything works, and then put it back in the box. That's all that means. And so just because you're getting like a used sewing machine, that doesn't mean that it's like not as good. Sure. Because just like buying like a game console from a game store, it's like it still works, it's still all good, and it's probably like half the price or less of a new one. So you can totally do that. I started out with like I think a $40 Brother sewing machine, and I used that one until I wore it out, and then I got my Janome that I use now. So yeah, you can get those just about anywhere. Walmart does have some sewing patterns. You can usually find a couple. Other like craft or fabric stores are definitely going to have a lot more, and they'll usually have sales where certain patterns are going to be available for a lot cheaper on certain days. Like I know Joann's, for example, they have like on Thursdays, some of their patterns are like $2.
Wow.
Like the list price on these, like this one that we're going to be talking about today, this Harry Potter robe one, this pattern like sells for $21.95. I definitely pay like $4 for this.
Very cool.
So just because it says that on the package doesn't mean that's necessarily what it costs. If you go to Walmart or somewhere like that, they probably are going to charge like the full price. Yeah. But a craft store, Amazon actually sells this pattern, I think, for like $7. You can usually get it for cheaper somewhere else.
I think I gave a bad example. There are, as you have said, much better places to go that are more specialized for this type of crafting.
Yeah. And you don't always have access to those places. Yeah.
Yes.
So
and you're probably more likely to find these patterns. And patterns are something that give you the instructions and materials needed to make what you're wanting to make, right?
Exactly. And so people can be really overwhelmed by patterns. You look at the back of this thing and it looks like a foreign language because it's got all these charts and all these figures and everything on it, and it's really confusing. And so that's why for this workshop, I developed a handout that Jim, you have.
Yeah, and we'll make the PDF available on our Fayetteville Public Library Teen WordPress, but this is the handout that we're looking at.
Okay, so this is the Simplicity pattern 8723, and that is the Harry Potter robe. And so it comes in a variety of sizes. You've got like little kid, medium kid, teen, and adult sizes. So it's a really useful pattern, I think, for starting out because it doesn't have a lot of complicated stuff. Like there's not a lot of like sewing technique that you really need to know to make this. It's pretty much just cutting out the shapes and then sewing the pieces together.
I have a very important question.
Yes.
Because I am a tall man, does that mean I have to be a Slytherin?
Yes.
No.
No, you can use whichever lining you want to represent your house. When we look at the handout, so that we've got available there, you see that I've got the back of the pattern on here and kind of explanations for what all of this stuff means. And so it can be really confusing when you're just when you're just staring straight at it and you're like, what in the world do all these numbers mean? What are all these words? And so the one thing that was really helpful for me when I was first getting started with sewing is I would look at the back of this envelope, I would see that there is a word, and I would look at that word and be like, I don't know what that word is. And then I would go look it up and say, okay, so they're saying the word interfacing on here. What in the world is interfacing? They're saying I need to buy like a couple yards of interfacing. And that, is fabric? Is that like, what is it? And so I looked it up. And interfacing is actually, so I can have a visual example here. It is usually a thin fabric that has glue dots on the back of it. And it's usually one-sided, like one side has the glue dots and one side is just flat. And so this is a fabric that you cut out and you actually iron onto your fabric pieces. And it's gonna add stability. You can usually use it in collars or in like cuffs on sleeves or on plackets for buttons going down the front. When you want a little extra stability, this is gonna add that. Okay. And the glue melts right on.
Cool.
And so if you don't know a word, look it up. This is going to be a new hobby, and just like anything else for you, there's going to be a whole new like glossary of words that you're not going to know, and that's okay. Right. It just means that you need to go look it up. So pull out your phone or pull out your computer or go see your local librarian and say, hey, can you help me figure out what interfacing is? And you'll find out what it is, and there you go. Yeah. You can also ask the staff people at fabric and craft stores. They do more than just cut the fabric. They actually know their sections really well, and they're going to say, this is where the interfacing is, this is where that is, this is where the notions are. Notions, that's a word for buttons, threads, zippers, any of the little bits and bobs that you need for making your thing. That's a notion.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. And so like you think like, well, notion, like I have a notion, but that's not really what it means. It's kind of a completely different usage of that word. Another good example of that is basting. In some of these instructions, it'll say you need to do a baste these pieces together. And I think like a turkey?
Like a turkey.
Like basting the juices over it? No, that's not what it means. In sewing, basting means you do a very loose stitch between two pieces that is going to get taken out later. The basting stitch is really helpful because it keeps pieces together while you're working on them so they don't move around. It's kind of like using pins, but a little different.
Gotcha. So yeah, these words that we may have seen before, but have their own context within the sewing world.
Exactly.
Cool.
So looking back at the handout and looking at the back of this pattern, the first section there says like it's suggested fabrics. You don't have to follow this. You don't have to do exactly what they say. But yeah, again, if you don't know what these words mean, like double knit, pont, broadcloth, gabardine, all of those are just different types of fabric. And so you can use web search to find out what these fabrics look like. You can ask the people in the fabric section at your craft stores what that is. And just, I'm still growing it. I'm not very good at like, oh yeah, that's organza and that's crepeback satin and that, like, I'm not really good at that yet even. So I just look it up. Like what kind of fabrics do I think would be helpful for this particular project? So those are just recommendations. It talks about having a lining. And so the lining is gonna be your house color. So whatever you go with there, that's your lining, because that's what's on the inside of your stuff. And then parts of it are going to be visible because they're going to fold open. And that's called facing. Whenever something like on the inside is kind of turned like a lapel of a jacket, that it faces outwards. And
What
so they
is
call
the
it
facing?
facing.
Interesting.
That's another term to use. The second part there talks about notions, so thread, talking about like cording, buttons for like the little front piece to hold your robe together. If you want to do some ribbon, all of that's their kind of recommendations for how much of that stuff to buy, so that you don't get home after only buying fabric and you're like, oh wait, I didn't buy buttons. How am I going to keep this together? You want to look through this whole thing so that you can really get your shopping list together ahead of time. Then it talks about measurements. So then this is when we get into the, like, what do all these numbers mean? And so I've drawn out a box there, and you can see on your own handout, but I'll point to it here. I've kind of drawn a box as one example, kind of this all the way up and down through this whole section. That's how you want to be looking at all of this information. You want to get your measurements. And so it's always best to do your measurements with a friend, because if you do them on yourself, they're usually going to be inaccurate. Because if you try to get like from your shoulder to the floor, you trying to measure that, you're going to bend down and you're going to mess up your measurement. So it's really good to have like a parent or a friend or somebody with you who can do your measurements for you, rather than you doing it yourself. But when they talk about chest measurement, what that means is that you just put it on the widest area of your chest, and then take a deep breath, and then that's your chest measurement. You don't want to measure it with like your chest all compressed and small, because then when you put on your garment, you're not going to be able to breathe.
Oh no. Yeah, that would be frustrating.
So you want your chest measurement to be your full chest so that you have room to breathe in what you're going to wear. Then your hip measurement, that's going to be at the widest part of your body, so chest, waist, hips. And again, it's usually best to get a friend to do that for you. You then take those numbers and you say, okay, so there's my chest measurement and there's my hip measurement. And maybe they don't line up exactly the way that it has it here, because all bodies are different. All bodies are going to be in kind of different shapes and sizes. But you just take your best, the closest one, whatever's the closest one for you, and that's going to be your column. So like that medium size, like that's the 38 to 40 chest, and then the 39 to 40 hip. So maybe that's your body size. And so whatever's closest to you, that's the medium. So you want to look up and down only on the medium one.
Okay.
I usually circle that entire column just so I'm looking at that one, because you don't want to look at all those other numbers because things get confusing. So like that's medium, so we'll use that one as an example. So moving down from there, we see that the line art for A is right there. So that's the sweater. So this pattern actually includes the pattern for a sweater. So if you want to wear that under your robe, you can actually sew your own Hogwarts sweater. And for that one, you'd want to get like a knit, like a sweater material. So it says for A, the sizes for that, we're looking at medium again. So 1 3/4. So that means that you want to buy 1 3/4 yard of whatever kind of fabric you want to make your sweater with. Okay. Over there, right under A, where it says top size for stitch knits only, and it says 60 inches with 2 stars beside it. This took me a very long time to figure out what this means, because nowhere on here does it explain what that number means.
Oh no.
And a little lower down where it says robe, and you see 45 and 60.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a note down at the very bottom of this handout where it says, what does 45 and 60 mean? That is the width of your fabric. Most bolts, like a bolt, I don't have a good example here. Most bolts of fabric, kind of those cardboard rolls, and then everything's just kind of wrapped around it a bunch of times. That's a bolt of fabric. Most of those that are on cardboard are going to be 45 inches. If you laid it out flat, if you unfolded it and measured it from side to side, that's 45 inches.
Okay.
So then they fold it in half and then roll it all up, and that's where you buy it in the fabric store. Where it says 60, that is a long bolt. So that's where you usually find in like the upholstery section, those long bolts of fabric, those are usually 60 inches wide. And so if you're buying the 60-inch fabric, you're going to need less of it because you're buying wider fabric. If you get the 45-inch one, you might need to buy a little more. So that's why there's two numbers there. The 45-inch fabric and the 60-inch fabric have two different measurements. So when we go down to robe for medium, it says 4 3/4 for 45 inches. And then 3 and 7/8, so basically 4 yards for the 60-inch fabric. So you'll buy less of it because you have wider fabric.
Very cool. Sense? See, this is why we brought you, because we would not have been able to figure that out on our own. So you had to do the hard work for us.
It's nowhere on there. So that's for the robe. Contrast hood and facing. So contrast hood, so that's the stuff that's inside of the hood, and the facing, like we talked about. So that's your house color. That's what you want to buy there. So that says for medium, like 1 5/8 or something like that. So that's how much of that fabric you would want to buy for your house color. There's interfacing. So it says some lightweight fusible interfacing. That's what I showed you earlier with the glue dots on it. It has a brand. You can buy whatever brand. They're more or less the same. 1 3/4 yard for child and teens, 1 3 for adults. So yeah, you would buy that much of that thin stuff with the glue on the back. You just buy that many yards because you're only applying that to certain spots.
Oh, okay.
Apply it just to the lapels and maybe the hood in a couple different areas. You don't need it for your whole garment.
Good.
So that's fine. They got some recommendations for the tie. They actually have a pattern here. You can tie your own tie or sew your own tie. There's interfacing for that because you want that to be kind of stiff and not lose its shape. And then down were finished garment measurements. So that's how long the thing is going to be. It's kind of a recommendation. Like if you use this pattern in the way that we provided it, it's going to be 42 inches long at the medium. So you can put your measurement up on your shoulder and say, okay, so if it's going to start there and go to the floor, 42 inches, that's probably going to be about like mid shin for me. So I would actually want my robe to be longer because being wizardy, I want like long flowing robes.
You gotta swish it, yeah.
And Jim, you're really tall, so you'd probably want yours a bit longer too. And so I would actually buy a little extra fabric from mine because I want my robe to be longer. Okay. So that's why that finished measurement guide is really helpful, because you can look at that and say, if you buy exactly what they tell you, and then you get home and you're like, oh, well, this is too short. Well, they give you the number right there. So you can use that as reference for how much fabric you need to buy. So in this case, yeah, I would want to buy more, probably maybe like an extra yard or so, just to have some wiggle room and be able to decide exactly how long I wanted my robe to be.
Very good. So those last numbers are still measured in inches, or?
Yes, all of these are in inches, and for the most part, you're always going to find if you buy patterns in America, they're going to be in inches or yards.
Inches and yards.
Meters.
Very good.
And then you see on the other side, that's all in French. So unless you speak,
we don't need that unless you know French.
When you look at the back of this, it's like, oh, that's so much information. How could I possibly look through all of that? The French side does use centimeters. I know I've covered it up in the handout. So if you are a metric system lover, then you can look at the centimeters rather than the inches. But here in America, I use the inches. And so that's kind of how to interpret these. Most of these are going to be set up very similar to this. It's going to be sizes, it's going to be fabric recommendations, all of that stuff are going to be down there. And again, just if you've got your phone with you, pull out your phone and just say, what is interfacing? Just Google that, because there's going to be vocabulary on here that you're not going to understand, and that's okay, because it's a whole new language. Sewing has its own language, just like any other hobby. Cooking is going to have its own language and its own way of doing things. So sewing's like that too. So the more you learn it, the more comfortable you're going to feel, and it's all going to work out.
Very cool. And yeah, like you said, it's great to go to people that know what they're talking about.
It is. So now what happens when you actually get the pattern? So you got the pattern envelope and you pull it out, and then there's all this tissue paper.
Oh boy.
And, this is it's all really thin and really fragile, and you're kind of scared because you're like, oh my gosh, what if I cut it wrong? What if I don't do the right thing? Well, in every pattern, there is going to be an instruction booklet.
Okay.
And so these instruction booklets fold out and usually have lots and lots of instructions on them. It's okay, don't get overwhelmed, one step at a time. This is going to be another opportunity to learn lots of sewing jargon. So all of that is going to be laying out like this, and it's just taking it one box at a time and saying, okay, so what are they talking about? It's got general directions. So it's got kind of the symbols on your pattern. Hopefully you can see that okay. You don't have to memorize all this right now, but it's got like whenever you see this symbol on the pattern, that's what it means. It means that this is your grain line. Your grain line is the direction of your the way your fabric goes. So like if you look really carefully at your t-shirt or whatever you're wearing right now, you'll see that there's a grain to it. So there's a weave of that that fabric. And so usually it goes up and down and left and right, and that creates your weave. Stretch fabrics are going to be really pulley and stretchy, and so they're going to have like 4-way stretch. Those usually aren't good for projects like this because they're going to droop and they're going to be all stretchy and saggy all over the place. Most things like when they suggest wool or gabardine or and most cottons are only going to have a very slight stretch whichever way you pull them. So those are better for more tailored stuff like this, like kind of a robe, like a Hogwarts robe that you would wear. So usually, unless you want to get some wild and crazy spandex stuff, I'd usually suggest something that doesn't have a lot of stretch because it's going to keep its shape better.
Very good.
So it's got that information. It's kind of defining all of that. It talks about the notches. Now, when you're looking at, and I've got this one kind of here. So this piece, this is the hood. So this is the hood for the child size. And so let's use this as an example. So first off, you're going to see a lot of lines. And so those are your various sizes. So extra small, small, medium, and large. Now you already took your measurements, so you know which one you are, if it's small, medium, or large. And so that's the line that you would cut across. So you would cut right around along the extra small line if that was you're making it for a small child, and then you just throw away the rest. If you wanted to save it in some way, you can do notches. I've done that with, I think I've actually done that here. Let's see. Yes, you can do notches so that this is a sleeve. So I cut this one. I wanted to preserve this pattern that at all the different sizes, so I could use it multiple times for different sized people. And so what I did was I cut notches so that I could fold along the size I needed. Fold right there, fold right there. So now I basically have the pattern size that I need without kind of messing up the pattern to where I couldn't use this for another sized person.
Very clever. Cool.
Do that all the time, but it's definitely something that you can use to if you want to make one for you and one for your friend and one for your dad and one for your mom, then that's a bunch of different sizes, and you don't want to buy this pattern 5 times.
Right.
So the notches, like I was talking about, we'll go back to this one, are very important. So let me see this here. And we see all these different triangles because those are the different sizes. So size, 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 size. We see these little triangles. Okay, so when you're cutting out your pattern, you do not want to ignore these triangles. These triangles are your very best friends because these triangles match up with other triangles on the other side of your stuff.
Okay.
And so when you have your fabric and you've got these 2 triangles right here, when you put your sleeve together to sew it, your triangles are going to line up perfectly. Okay?
Okay.
You just go snip, snip, you cut straight through it. Forget the triangles. I don't need a guide. Well,
good luck.
Whenever you start working and you're like, why don't these line up? Like, this is all up here and this is all down here. Wow, I really wish I had a guide or something to help me. Well, use your triangles. So every time I will cut up and then down and then keep going, and I will just have those triangles sticking out there. Those are going to be in what's called your seam allowance. So seam allowance is the stuff that's on the inside of your seam. It's got usually like 1/2 inch or 5/8 inches, something like that. And all of that is just on the inside of whatever you're working on. And so those little triangles will just be sticking out. You can snip them off later if you want to, but don't just go snipping and cut across that whole thing, because the triangles are so helpful, especially in more complicated stuff, like where the sleeve is going to line up with the rest of your robe. You want those, they actually give you double triangles on this side, because one side is going to have 2, this side is going to have just 1. So that way you know this is the back of the sleeve because it has 2, and this is the front because it has 1. And that's going to line up with your other pattern pieces. So like here, with the back, this is the back piece. So the back has 2 notches right there. And see how I've cut this out, where I've just left, so I'd remind myself to leave those. So when we put this up here, that's the back piece. It's going to look like that.
And your notches are in the right place.
Notches are in the right place. There's the back notch. There's a top notch here. There's 3 notches right here, 1, 2, 3, because that's going to line up the back center of your work. There's a notch up here. That's where your hood and the collar is going to connect. There's one right here. That's where I think there's actually pockets on this one. Yeah. So that's where your pocket piece is going to line up. All of that, they're all your friends. They're all there to help you. It's not just nonsense.
I already love them. They are my friends.
They will take care of you, and they will guide you to where you have something that isn't frustrating and doesn't get you to the end and makes you sad.
Very cool. Top notch. Thank you for explaining that.
Yes. So yeah, you just cut it all out, leave out your triangles, and then just look at your stuff and see, so what does this all mean? What does this all say? And just take one thing at a time, and you're going to figure it out. Be patient with yourself. One thing I also want to mention, talking about frustrations, is I always do a mock-up the first time I make something.
Okay.
And a mock-up is like your practice run. And it's always, to me, worth doing, because I don't want to buy expensive fabric, potentially expensive, doesn't always have to be expensive, but I don't want to spend a bunch of money on fabric, cut it all out, start putting it together and realizing, oh my gosh, I used the wrong pattern piece for this one. I've done that before. On this very robe, I used the sweater sleeve, the tight sweater sleeve, instead of the bell-shaped sleeve. So I was working on my mock-up, and I was like, why are these sleeves so skinny? This doesn't look right at all. And then I realized I had used the wrong pattern piece. And I would have been so mad at myself if I had cut out my black Hogwarts robe material and basically wasted all that fabric because I cut it, this tiny little sleeve. So mock-ups are your friends. Mock-ups are your first drafts. They're your practice.
Not on real fabric.
Yes, so the stuff that I use for mock-ups, my go-to is muslin. Muslin is a very inexpensive white cotton fabric. It's not dyed, it's not processed, it's got like kind of some roughness to it. This is usually like $2 to $3 a yard. I buy it by the bolt. Like I will go to a fabric store and I will probably spend like maybe $30 on an entire bolt of muslin because I go through it so quickly, just based on the stuff that I make.
Mm-hmm.
It is always worth it to me because it doesn't have stretch. It's affordable. You can tear it really easily. You can write on it with a pencil. You can write on it with a marker and it'll stay. So this is my very favorite stuff. But you don't have to buy muslin. You can also use sheets. And so these are Goodwill sheets that I've torn and cut and used for mock-ups. So those are usually even less expensive. You can go to Goodwill or other thrift stores and get sheets. You can just use those for your mock-up. And you can also usually find good fabric, like curtains and stuff is usually kind of like a brocade or decorative fabric. You can usually find that for cheap. And if you can't get any of that, you can use wrapping paper. So I especially love the kind that has the grid on the inside.
Oh yeah.
because that way your lines, you can use those lines to kind of measure things up really well. You can also use wrapping paper to copy your patterns. So like when we were showing earlier, if you want to do like different sizes and preserve the shape of your pattern before you cut it, you can copy it, just lay it out flat on Christmas paper and a wrapping paper, and there you've had a copy of your pattern. So this can be really helpful too. But my favorite is muslin, just because it's actual fabric and it drapes like fabric. If you put it on a dress form, it acts like fabric because it is.
Sure.
So
But it's nice to have options. So thanks for sharing different options with us.
Yep. Yeah, so as far as working with a sewing machine itself, if you have access to one, the first one I ever used was my grandmother's. She made a bunch of clothes for my parents and aunts and uncles growing up. So she had a sewing machine, and I just played with it. The thing that I think that people stress out about most is the bobbin.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
I know that word.
So I'm going to tilt this down. So this is my sewing machine that I use for my costume making and stuff. And so you've got your thread. So your top thread is up here, and this can be in a lot of different places on top of a sewing machine, but usually it's somewhere up here. So this is your top thread. In a sewing machine, it's not like when you're doing hand sewing where it's up, down like that. There's a mechanism where the needle puts the top thread down. And then underneath, usually this can be in a couple different places. Mine is set up flat. Sometimes it's kind of at the front, like up here. So it can be in a couple different places. But there's a mechanism in there that creates a tiny little loop around that top thread and then pulls it back up to create kind of a chain. Okay. So you're not just going up and down. It requires two threads to create this chain of threads that will hold your stuff together. So the bobbin, and I'll pop the bobbin out here. The bobbin is usually a small spool of thread. They usually look like this. This is a metal one. They come in plastic. They come in a couple different versions. But it's a small amount of usually your top thread. They usually match. They don't have to, but usually they match. And then that is loaded down beneath. So you want to pull out your sewing machine manual and learn how to thread the bobbin. Mm-hmm. That's one of your first things, because you can't really sew with just the top. You got to have the top and the bottom thread going, because otherwise it's just going up and down and not connecting to anything and you're not sewing. So that's usually where people find the most frustration when they're first getting started, because the bobbin jams and the bobbin messes up and the bobbin won't thread correctly. And so it's just pulling out your manual and saying, so bobbin, tell me all about the bobbin. I'm gonna go step by step through that manual. If your sewing machine didn't come with a manual, like maybe you got it secondhand or you inherited it from somebody, those manuals are usually available online. So you can just say like, okay, Janome, new home, is there a number? Yeah, DC 1050. And you can usually go online and find, like Janome would have the manual for this online. The other thing to kind of keep aware of is your tension. So there's this little wheel here that has a couple different settings on it. I almost never mess with this because I rarely have to. But your tension is how tight your thread is getting pulled when it comes back up. So the higher the number, the more it's pulling, and the lower the number that's loose. Most of the time it's just right there in the middle. I never mess with this unless you're working with like really weird fabrics. You probably won't have to. But that's something else to play with. Like I'll run muslin through my sewing machine at different settings and see what it looks like. Your sewing machine manual will usually have suggestions for fixing those problems. Like if your threads are too loose or too tight, all of that stuff, your manual is your best friend when figuring that stuff out.
Cool. So the patterns and notches that we've looked at could translate to hand sewing or a sewing machine. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. If you, I wouldn't want to hand sew a Hogwarts robe.
I wouldn't either. I would want a machine.
But there's certainly smaller projects, like maybe a top or something that you could totally sew by hand. It'd be very couture of you. That's another sewing term. Couture is custom made, hand sewn. So you can say that you're creating couture garments. Yeah, you can totally sew it by hand if a sewing machine is not something that you want to do. It's still, you just cut out the shapes. And it's like when it kind of clicked with me that like clothes are just shapes. Like they're just it's like if you took this shirt and you took all the seams out, they're just shapes when you lay it out flat, but they're cut in a way that it goes around the body and it fits us in certain ways. It's very mathematical. There's lots of math involved, and fortunately people who are way smarter than me have figured out how to do all of that, especially with multiple sizes. So they're just shapes. So yeah, one thing I mentioned that I was going to talk about altering a pattern. You can see this. So this dress form, it is not exactly my size, but it's pretty close. But you see here how this is hanging off the shoulder a lot here. Yeah. So for this pattern, I actually shortened this pattern quite a bit. I think I took about an inch off, because I wanted it to hit my, kind of like my t-shirt's doing right now. I wanted it to hit my shoulder. I didn't want it hanging down like here, because I thought that it looked as good. So you can totally just alter this. That's why the mock-ups are great, because if you put on your mock-up and you're like, ooh, this is swallowing me, this is huge. Well, where can I make it smaller? You can just kind of fold your pattern back a little bit and make a similar a shape, but it fits your body. It's for you. Dress forms are great. If you can get one, you can make a dress form out of duct tape. You can put your saran wrap around yourself and then wrap yourself up in a bunch of duct tape. Have a friend carefully cut out the back of that, tape up the back, and then stuff it full of stuffing. You can get like pillow stuffing like this, and you can stuff that thing as tight as you can, and you can actually make yourself a body form out of that. They usually don't last a long time, but it can be helpful for creating custom stuff like this.
Well, I've got my next quarantine project right there.
Have a friend help you do it. You will cut yourself.
Okay.
Basically, that's basically it. It's just my biggest piece of advice is be patient with yourself, and be open to learning, because you're not going to be able to do everything on your first day. And I like the phrase, don't compare your day 1 to someone else's day 500. I've been doing this for about 5 years now, and I'm proud of the stuff I do, but I see other people like, wow, I wish I could do that. And I just have to remember, like, they've been doing this for like 20, 30 years, or maybe they're professional seamstresses and I'm just a hobbyist. So be patient with yourself and just have fun. It's a fun hobby, and it comes with frustrations, but that's just like everything else. But when you get that thing done that you've really been working hard on and you're excited, it's a character that you love, then it's going to be totally worth the effort.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you. I think that's all my questions, but thank you so much, Michael. This has been very informative, and I love that we have so many options and that this can just be as experimental as you want it to be. So, yeah. Or as structured as you want it to be. So thank you all for watching this video. Thank you, Michael Burson, for leading us today. Michael, if there were people that watch this video that want to follow you on social media, where could they do so?
Absolutely. So on Instagram, that's where I'm most active. I'm the Wizard Taylor, at the Wizard Taylor, all one word, no underscores or anything. On YouTube, my wife and I have a YouTube channel called Michael and Haley, and so we post a couple of tutorials on there. If you're into Harry Potter, we post a lot of Harry Potter type content on there too. And then we also have a Facebook page, which is Michael and Haley on Facebook. So you can search for that, and our cosplay page that we kind of do together is on there.
Very cool. Thank you. We'll throw all those links into the comments or descriptions of this video. And TikTok, yep, can't neglect your thousands of TikTok followers.
So I'm also on TikTok at the Wizard Taylor.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been awesome. And thank you for watching this video. This has been Teens Create Introduction to Sewing, part of our 2020 Imagine Your Story summer reading series. Be sure to watch our social media platforms for more content coming to you all summer long. And if you haven't signed up for summer reading, it is not too late to do so. Be sure you're tracking your summer reading with Read Squared all summer long. Again, thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Michael. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.